Fantastic. Excellent. All right, we'll say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning share. To thank our annual Talmud Torah sponsor, the Tolson Mishpacha of Eretz Yisrael, for dedicating all the Shumer and Roshos this year as a zechus for Besoros Tovos for Am Yisrael. Our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Adar, Haba Alinu Latova, Terry and Steve Zinn, in loving memory of Terry's father, Dr. Harry Khan, C. Hirsch Ben Yosef HaKohen, the Ziv, Levin, and Berman families in memory of William Ziv, Zev Shmuel Ben Yisrael. Our week of learning sponsors, Nathan and Beth Adler, in memory of Judy Goldman, Yehudis Esther, Bas Elazar Zichron Livracha, and our day of learning sponsors, Reuven Rakovsky, in memory of Ira Kasavsky and Lillian Waxstein Zichron Livracha. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the Neshama Slav and Aliyah, the families in Nechama, all of those who need a refuah shavan together, the Kol Chali Yisrael, Kadosh Baruch Hu Shemir Tashem, bring home all of our hostages and our holy soldiers should be successful. B'chol Ma'aseh Yedeihem. Let's do with that. Let's go. Today's daf is Tzadik Gimel 93. We are starting on Tzadik Beis Amud Aleph 92a. 14 lines up from the bottom, but we got this. Rabbi Lazar Omer. Rabbi Lazar. Rabbi Lazar says as follows. Anyone who does not, literally again, allow Talmidei Chachamim to benefit from his possessions, will not see bracha forever. Meaning, which is another way of saying, that a person is supposed to share his possessions with Talmidei Chachamim, meaning supports Torah. And if a person does not use his possessions to support Torah, he'll never go ahead and see blessing from those possessions. In other words, what's the logic over here? We're talking about someone who does not want to utilize his resources to help Talmidei Chachamim, to help Torah, thinking that by not giving them, he'll have more for himself. So therefore the halacha says it doesn't work that way. If you don't use your resources to go and help Torah, at the end, ultimately you'll just have less for yourself. Shne'emar. Ein srid li'achla akin lo yachal tuvo ve'ein srid ela tamid chachamim shne'emar sridim asher Hashem korei va'am Rabbi Lazar. Rabbi Lazar says as follows. Interesting halacha. Kol shein mishayer pas al shulchano ein rasim brach li'olam. If at the end of the meal you don't leave over bread on your table, you will not see blessing. Which means, in other words, make sure to always leave over some bread on your table. Okay, so the Gemara says, on the other hand, the Gemara says, Shneimar in sridli achlo, akelo yachal tuva. V'ha'ai, the Gemara says, V'ha'am Rabbi Lazar, kol mishayer pesisim al shulchano, kilo oved avodah zara. But Rabbi Lazar said that whoever leaves over bread, literally pieces of bread on his table, ultimately it's as if he worships idolatry. So it sounds like, obviously, leaving over bread is not a good thing. So the Gemara says, Shneimar ochem legad shulchan, v'ha'amalim lemani v'masach lo kashya, so apparently, the way of Avodah Zarah, of this Avodah Zarah God, was the way you worshipped it was little pieces of bread together with a whole loaf. So if you leave little pieces with a whole loaf, that's what it looks like Avodah Zarah. But just go ahead and leave pieces, that's where there's siman bracha. I will say, so what's the pshat that leaving over bread represents a siman bracha in one's house? So first of all, this could be a little bit more of almost like a Havdalah type motif of overflowing the cup, right? The idea is that there's extra. So same way we overflow the cup of Havdalah, because again, we want it to be that literally our cup runneth over. That's what we want. So too leaving over extra bread indicates that there's surplus in the home. That's one possibility. The other possibility is that halacha l'maaseh, if there's leftover bread, that means a person didn't eat everything. If you didn't eat everything, that means I exercised some level of self-control. What's Kedusha? What's Kedoshim to you? The Ramban says, Kadeshes atzmecha b'mashe mutalach, is moderation. Is even, not just drawing the line between mutter and asur, but even within the world of that which is mutter, I limit myself, I moderate myself. So perhaps that's the pshat as well. That if I have a meal and I don't eat everything, but I leave a little bit over, that's ultimately, again, that's a display of moderation. And where there's moderation, ultimately there's Kedusha. Okay. Interesting halacha. Now, literally translated, Rashi says over here, kalamachlif b'dibura means a person changes his voice, which makes it sound like a person is trying to conceal his identity. But the truth is, machlif b'dibura could also just mean a person doesn't keep his word. So whoever doesn't keep his word, it's as if he worships idolatry. Ksiv hacha, va'isi be'enav kimisaseh. Ksiv hasam, havel hema maseh tatuin. Remember, Lazar, Interesting halacha. Kol mistakel be'erva kashto nin eres. So literally translated, whoever looks at an erva, and we'll discuss what this means in just a moment, kashto nin eres, his bow is emptied. What does that mean? Take a look at Rashi. Kashto nin eres, Rashi says over here, so the Gemara says, koach kishui ever shalo ninar she'ena molid. So Rashi seems to be saying over here, now again, we'll discuss what erva means, but if a person looks at erva, which means something illicit, kashton in eres. Now Rashi understands this to be a metaphor that literally he becomes impotent. Right? So koshi ever shalo. So can you go ninar she'ena molid? Shneimar area mer kashtecha area sha'ata mishtad ba mamish bervasa hitar kashtecha davar acher hamistakel hamachashi ba'arayos de'eshes ish. So first approach of Rashi is that literally one looks at something they're not supposed to be looking at. So right, if I look at things I'm not supposed to be looking at, or second approach in Rashi is that a person thinks about a married woman. It could be even when he's with his own wife, he thinks about a married woman. Either we're talking about some type of either illicit thoughts or illicit, or actually illicit looking at things which are illicit and inappropriate. What's inappropriate? What's the result of it? Kashton in eres. His bow is empty. Now again, so Rashi understands it to mean almost like literally like a erectile dysfunction. Like he's just not going to be able to father children. Perhaps also on a deeper level, what it's saying is like this: that the thing about arayos, the thing about immorality, is that it's all consuming. Right? When a person has a lust, a person has a desire for arayos, it takes over the individual, and literally it could sap a person of all of their strength. Every single one of us has a reservoir, a certain amount of strength, a certain amount of vitality. That's what we got, right? In other words, you can only go so long without sleep, right? We feel that this hour in the morning, right? I can only put in other words, as much as I want to say my potential is limitless, which is true, my koach is not, right? In other words, there does come a certain point in time where there's no more gas in the tank. I think what Chazal are telling us is, be careful what you use your energy for, because there are certain things that are all-consuming in the realm of energy. And the truth is, arayos, immorality, is one of those things. It'll empty your bow, right? It'll empty the tank. It'll go ahead and sap you of all your vitality, and therefore, not only am I engaged in Avera, but at the end of the day, there's nothing left in the tank to be able to do good things as well. Profound Gemara. Let's go. Person should always be humble. Rashi says over here, be humble and you will live. Humility is the key to longevity. Fascinating. Interesting. What's the right? The proof to this is they will say, there's a concept of nigei batim, which means a home could have tzaras. But interestingly enough, the only way for a home to have tzaras is if you can get natural light in the house. If ultimately a home does not have windows, we don't start bringing in candles or lanterns to be able to see whether or not there's tzaras on the home. So the idea is a home without windows represents humility. A home without windows can't get tzaras. A person who is humble saves himself from a lot of life's afflictions. Humility is the secret to longevity. What's the meaning of the pasuk that says Sha'ol va'otzerechem eretz lo savei mayim? So v'chi ma'inyan Sha'ol eitzarechem. What's the connection between Sha'ol is the grave, Rechem is the womb? What's the connection between the grave and the womb? This is fascinating. Ma rechem machnis umotzi, right? Just like the rechem, just like the womb takes in, right? The womb takes in the semen and ultimately again emits the baby. Av Sha'ol machnis umotzi. So to the grave takes in, you bury the dead, but motzi tchias hamesim. V'alod v'am kal v'chomer uma rechem shemachnisim bo b'chashai motzi and osa b'koli kolos. So the womb, which takes in quietly, yet ultimately emits with great cries, birth of the baby, says Sha'ol shemachnisim bo b'kolos einon din shemotzi mimena b'koli kolos. Certainly the grave, which again, when someone's buried, when something comes into the grave, there's much crying. Right? There's crying. So too when it emits, i.e. tchias hamesim, there's going to be even greater cries of joy. Ultimately, the Gemara says this is a conclusive proof that there's Tchias HaMesim. So we'll say once again, you see, we're fixated on proving this notion of Tchias HaMesim. So the Gemara says, this is a good raya. Tarad Be'elio, Tzadikim Shazar HaKadosh Baruch Hu Lechiyos, Inu Chozun Li'afron. So we'll say this is a fascinating halacha. Tzadikim, who HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to go ahead and bring back to life Tchias HaMesim during Yemos HaMashiach, Messianic era, will not die. Which is fascinating. Also, all these questions come up when it comes to Messianic era. So it's going to be Tchias HaMesim, resurrection of the dead. Okay, which is going to be incredible. Incredible. So do people die again afterwards? The Gemara says, Tzadikim don't die. Once Tzadikim are resurrected, they remain alive. Shneimar Ba'yah Mishar B'Tzion Ba'nos B'Yushalayim Kadosh Yomer Lo Kalakos L'Chaim Yushalayim Ma Kadosh Li'olam Kayim Af Hilion Kayim. So the pasuk compares Tzadikim to Kadosh, to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Just like the Ribbon Shalom is eternal, so too when the Tzadikim come back to life, there'll be an element of eternality as well. Amud Beis V'im Tomar Osam Shanim Shasar HaKadosh Baruch Hu Bahen as Sha'as Elsa Shanim Sha'as HaKadosh Baruch Hu L'Chadesh Banas Olamo Shneimar V'niska V'Hashem Levado Bayomahu. I shall say, so this is pretty wild stuff. So we're going to talk about this idea in greater depth, that there is this concept that at a certain point in time, the world will stop. Right? We have this, we're going to see this. The world was created for 6,000 years. After 6,000 years, the world stops. What happens after it stops? Take 2 or 3, whatever number we're up to, right? Because Baruch Hu is going to recreate another world from new, which sounds like everything that exists will be erased, and Baruch Hu will start again. What happens to the tzaddikim during that like cosmic rebirth stage? Where do they go? So the Gemara says, wow. The Rosh Hashanah makes for the tzaddikim wings like birds, and they fly above the water. In other words, they'll say, what's the water? So the Pashtus, if the world is going to be recreated, what's the original state of creation? Right? So the world will go back to water, but the tzaddikim will be given wings, and ultimately, again, those wings will propel them over the water. Which I will say, by the way, is such a shne'amar, akin lo nira b'hamir eretz b'mot harim b'leiv yamim v'shema tamar yesh lam tsar. Maybe you'll say they have tsar, maybe they'll have pain and difficulty during this time. Tamalomar v'kol ve'ashem yachalifu koach ya'aver ever kin sharim. The tzaddikim will be given wings like eagles. Yarutzu v'lo yigo, yilchu v'lo yi'afu. Ultimately, again, they will go, they will run, and they will not be tired. They will walk, and they will not be They will not be tired. So ultimately, first of all, such a beautiful yisod that the tzaddikim will be given wings. Truth is, that's what tzaddikim have. Tzaddikim have wings. The great avod of becoming a tzaddik, or the great benefit of becoming a tzaddik, is sometimes the ability to transcend everything that life throws your way. The godless of tzaddikim is the wings they have to be able to literally transcend all the difficulties and challenges. So the Gemara says as follows. So what about, we're going to talk about this in just a little bit. We've referenced this already. What about the dead that Yecheskel brought back to life? Right? Yecheskel did Tchias HaMesim. Now, after Yecheskel brought those people back to life, they died again. So right, they died again. So shouldn't that be a raya that even the tzaddikim who come back to life will ultimately die? Will die. So the Gemara says, Savala Kimand Amar be'emes mashal haya. So this is interesting. He actually holds like the opinion that the story of Yecheskel, right, the Atzamas Hayaveshos, the valley of dry bones, that was a mashal. That was a mashal. It didn't actually happen, but rather again it's a parable, the Sanya. So this in of itself is a sort of a dramatic machlokes. The Sanya. Rabbi Loza Omer, Mesim Shech Yecheskel Amdu Raglayim Amdu Shira Umesu. The people Yecheskel brought back to life, they stood on their feet, they sang Shira, and then they died again. Mashira Amru, what did they sing? Mashira Amru, Hashem Memis B'Tzedek U'Mechaye B'Rachamim. Rabbi Yeshua Omer, Shira Zu Amru, Hashem Memis U'Mechaye Morit Sha'al Vayal. Rabbi Yehuda says, MS Mashal Haya. Rabbi Yehuda says, now I'll say the Lashon over is very interesting. MS means truth. Mashal Haya, it was a parable. So the Gemara says, it doesn't make sense. Im MS Lama Mashal, Bim Mashal Lama MS. Which one is it? In other words, if you tell me it's MS means that it really happened. So if it really happened, it really happened. Otherwise, if it's a mashal, so then it's a mashal. What's going on over here? So the Gemara says, Ella be'emes mashal haya. Rather, again, what he means is, in reality, the whole thing was a mashal. Right? So we'll say, by the way, a fascinating machlokes about whether or not the episode of Yecheskel with the Atzamos Yeveshos, did it happen or not? Did it happen, or was it simply a mashal? Fundamental machlokes. Rabbi Elazar ben Shav Yosef Lili Omer, Meisim Sheheki Yecheskel Alu La'aretz Eretz Yisrael, V'nasu Nashim V'alidu Banim Ubanos. It's incredible. So others say, no, it really happened. It really happened. And by the way, they didn't die immediately after singing Shira. Right? What happened? Yecheskel brought them back to life. They sang Shira. They went to Eretz Yisrael. They married. They had kids. So the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira Arangla v'Amar Ani mibnei benehem v'alalu tefillin she'eniach li avi abba mehem. So incredible. Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira stands up and says, I'm a descendant of them. I'm a descendant of one of those people who was brought back to life from Yecheskel. And ultimately, again, these are the tefillin that I received from my great-grandfather. So beautiful. So the Gemara says, Umanin hu meisim shechi Yecheskel. By the way, who were these people? Who were these people who died in this valley, right? Who were these individuals who Yecheskel brought back to life? We'll say this is pretty wild. Amarav Elu b'nei Ephraim shemonu l'keitz v'to. This is incredible. I will say there is a not so well-known story that there were a group of Jews who tried to escape from Egypt earlier than the rest of Klal Yisrael. They were members of the tribe of Ephraim. That's why also Ephraim's numbers are relatively lower than other tribes. There was a group from Ephraim that tried to escape from Egypt early, and they were killed. So the Gemara says, what happened with them? They made a mistake. They were good people. They just made a mistake. Shnei Amar, u'bnei Ephraim shuselach ubara beno v'sachas beno v'alada beno v'sachas beno uzvada beno shuselach beno ve'ezer ve'alazar ve'alad v'hargum anshe Gat haladim baris. They were killed by the people of Gat. Uksiv v'yisal Ephraim aviem yomim rabim v'yavo echav l'nachamo. And ultimately, again, so they were mourned. Father Ephraim mourned for them. What happened over here? They made a mistake. They made a mistake about the calculation. Remember, by Bris Ben Avsam, Hashem says to Adam Avinu, your children will be enslaved for 430 years. The clock actually started from the birth of Yitzchak. They thought the clock started from the actual Bris Ben Habasarim. So when year 430 comes, they think, oh, it's time to go, and they leave. But of course, unfortunately, they were wrong, and they were killed. Those were the Atzamas Yeveshos that Yecheskel brought back to life. Incredible. So the Gemara says, Shmuel says, Elu b'nei Adam shekafru b'tches amesim, shnei Rav Yomer elei ben Adam atzamos ha'ela, kol beis Yisrael, heima heina omrim yavshu atzmosenu v'avda tikvasenu, nigzir lanu. So again, Shmuel says, these were people who denied tches amesim. Interesting. They denied tches amesim, and ironically enough, they're brought back to life by Yecheskel. Rabbi Yomi Rabbi Amar Elu b'nei Adam she'ein b'hem lachlukis shel mitzvah. These are individuals, unfortunately, who had not even they had no mitzvahs. Not the lashon of lachlucha shel mitzvah means like the moisture of a mitzvah. They didn't have any element of mitzvah moisture associated with them. Shnei Amar hatzamos hayveshos shimu dvar Hashem. Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha says, Elu b'nei Adam shechipu es heichal kulam shkatzim v'ramasim. These were people who unfortunately denigrated and degraded the Beis Hamikdash. Shneimar va'avol ve'erev v'hine kol tab nisremes v'behem shekes kol gelulu beis Yisrael v'chukal akir saviv uksiv hasam v'virayin aleim saviv. Okay, Rabbi Yochanan says, Elu mesim shebebika dura. These are the people ultimately again who died in Bikas Dura. Now, what's Bikas Dura? Now we're going to get into a fascinating story. These were Jews who were killed by Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar, right? So remember again. So these Jews and Yecheskel brought them back to life. What happened in Bikas Dura? Rabbi Yochanan, Minar Eshel ad Rabas Bikas Dura. Shebeshah shehila Nebuchadnezzar Ashas Yisrael. Listen to this. We'll say second wide line, and the bottom of Tzadik Beis and Beis 92b were flying. So listen to this. When Nebuchadnezzar went ahead and exiled Klal Yisrael, so what happened? So the Gemara says, "Hayu bahen bachrim sheyumnagnin shahayu ganin esachama biyofyan." There were a group of young men who were so exceedingly handsome that literally, this is so beautiful, they put the sun to shame with their beauty, right? The sun is considered to be like quintessential beautiful luminescence. These boys, these young men were so handsome that ultimately, again, they put the sun to shame. So what happened? V'hayu kastios ra'os osan v'shofa'as zavos. And what would happen? So the Kastian women would see them, and literally, again, they would experience a blood flow, a zava flow. I will say now, again, there's this concept in halacha called dam chimud, which means that sometimes at a point of incredible arousal, a woman could also go ahead and bleed. So these Castilian women saw these Jewish boys, and they experienced this flow. Amr leba'alei, and so ultimately they told their husbands, or ba'alei lemelech, and their husbands told the king, v'siva melech b'hargum. So the king killed them. Apparently they didn't want, right? They didn't want such good-looking Jews to be alive. V'adayin hayu zofos, but still, even as corpses, these young men were very handsome. So what happened? Siva hamelech v'ramsum. The king had the bodies trampled so that the boys would be disfigured. Overwhelming story. So the Gemara says these are the bones that Yecheskel brought back to life, and all of this happened in Bikas Dura. It happened in the Dura Valley. The Gemara transitions to some incredible stories regarding Nebuchadnezzar. So remember again, so remember context. Nebuchadnezzar's primary advisor, and actually we're going to see that actually Nebuchadnezzar deified him, was Daniel. Right? Contemporaries of Daniel were Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So the Gemara tells the story that Nebuchadnezzar had erected an idol of himself. He commanded everyone is to bow down to it. Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah refused to bow. As a result, they are thrown into a fiery furnace. So the Gemara says, so Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yecheskel, I'm sorry, so B'shah Hibam Nebuchadnezzar Es Chanai Mishael B'Azariah L'Kiv Shema Eish, Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yecheskel, Lech Be'ech Yemisa Bikas Dura. So again, at the time the Chanai Mishael and Azariah thrown into the furnace, this is when Hashem tells Yecheskel, right? Yecheskel's contemporary of Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah. It's incredible, by the way. Can you imagine that generation with all of these great men? So as Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah are being thrown into the Kivshan, Hashem tells Yecheskel, go and bring back the dead in the Dura Valley. So what happened? So after the bones were brought back to life, so apparently it wasn't just the bones that were in the valley. All the bones of the people who had died were brought back to life. So interestingly enough, apparently, as crazy as this sounds, Nebuchadnezzar had fashioned like a goblet out of the bones of some of his victims. So as the bones are brought back to life, he's drinking his wine. One of the bones from his goblet slaps him in the face. So the Gemara says, Amar Mati V'Sha'elu. So Nebuchadnezzar says, what's up? What's going on over here? So Amru Lo Chaverein Sha'elu Mechayim Mesim B'Bikas Dura. So he said, the friend of these guys being Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, is bringing back the dead in the Dura Valley. Pasach va'amar asoi kamen ravrivin v'tasmoi kama takifin machuse machus olam v'shaltane im dar vadar. So we'll say in this moment, it's incredible. In this moment, so Nebuchadnezzar begins to sing Shira to Hashem. It's pretty amazing. And if you look what he says, this God, look how great he is, look how strong he is. His monarchy is a monarchy forever, and his dominion is from generation to generation. Rabbi Yitzchak, Yutzak Zav Roseach Lesoch Piv Shal Osa Rasha. So literally again, molten gold should be poured into the mouth of Nebuchadnezzar. In other words, shut him up. Shut him up. Why? Shalmali lo ba malach v'sitra apiv bikesh lignos kol shiros shpachos shamar David v'sefer Tilim. It was incredible. Had the malach not come and struck him on the face, Nebuchadnezzar would have sang more beautiful songs than David HaMelech, right? He would have dispelled. So I'll say, so that's the power. So as beautiful as everything that David HaMelech did in Tehillim, Nebuchadnezzar's shira could have been even more beautiful. And I will say to yourself, how could a Nebuchadnezzar make greater shir than David HaMelech? So it's a simple chashbon. Remember, the greater the evil, the greater the power for good. Every person has koch. So Nebuchadnezzar, who was so evil that he could destroy the Beis Hamikdash and exile Klal Yisrael and subject our people to all of these terrible things, if he were to harness that power, and channel it towards good, there is no telling what he could accomplish. Incredible. 6 miracles happened that day. They're talking about the day that Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were thrown into the Kivshan Eish. What were they? Number one, they were in Safa Kivshan. It was normally the cauldron was actually was underground. It arose above ground so that everybody would be able to see the miracle that was happening. Next, Nifratz HaKivshan, part of the wall of the Kivshan cracked open so that people could see into the Kivshan what was happening. Homak Sodo, the foundation cracked. Nepach Tzelam Al Panav, the big idol of Nebuchadnezzar, fell on its face. The Nisrifu Arba Malchios, ultimately, 4 other kings who were allies of Nebuchadnezzar were incinerated that day. And Yecheskel brought back the dead in the Dura Valley. The Kula Gemara. Ultimately, again, all of these are tradition. All these miracles we have are tradition. Va'arba malchios kruxiv. We know about the death of the four kings from the pasuk. What does the pasuk say? Unevuchanetzar malcha shalach al-michnash ulachashta parnio sagina pechusa adar gzina nidvar Gad varia ditavaria tafasya v'chol shaltuni medinasa uksiv isi guvin yudon uksiv umiskanchin achtaparna saganya pechusa v'adivi malka chazan gavra. So what's interesting is in the first pasuk there's four. Sounds like a right. So again, in the first psukim, in the first pasuk, there's four more names. In the second pasuk, there's less names, which indicates that Sanhedrin, Chanai, Mishael, and Azariah, ultimately, again, some of his allies were killed. Incredible. Tana debate Rabbi Lazar. Tana debate Rabbi Lazar. Ben Yaakov. Afilu b'shas hasakana was incredible Gemara. So Tana debate Rabbi Lazar. Ben Yaakov. Afilu b'shas hasakana lo yishana adamis atzma min rabbanos shalo. We'll say this is incredible. Even in a time of danger, a person should not go ahead and change his dignified ways. Shneimar ba'adin gavra elach kafsu b'sar b'leon pashne v'kabelason. Chanai Mishael and Azariah, even when they were thrown into the kivshan aish, they wore their distinguished clothing. Now, what does this mean? Take a look at Rashi. We'll say last Rashi on the daf. Aishan min rabbanos shalo shehari Chanai Mishael v'Azariah halevushin big day tifarton kishushchu lekivshan. So when Chanai Mishael and Azariah were thrown into the kivshan, they were still wearing their royal clothing, their dignified clothing. So the Gemara says, "So al yishana shlo yira mevuhal umefuchad umefuchad umisbaishin sona mipanav." We'll say it's incredible Gemara. What is Rabbi Ben Yaakov saying? Rabbi Ben Yaakov saying, a person must always remain dignified, even in the face of adversity. Sometimes when we are overwhelmed by our circumstances, so ultimately, again, we become, understandably, all confused, and we lose it. We lose it. And as a result, we ourselves act in an undignified manner. The Gemara says the power of a Yid is always to maintain dignity and level-headedness, even in the midst of overwhelming circumstances. So Chanai, Mishael, and Azariah, what did they do before they were thrown into the kivshan aish? They fixed their bekishas, right, and they went ahead, right, and they straightened themselves out, and they were ready. They were ready. And I will say, by the way, this is the story of the Jew throughout the ages. Throughout the ages, the ability to maintain a dignity and a refinement, because deep down I know it's not my enemy who controls my fate. It's HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And because I'm always in the hands of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I can keep level-headed, I can not lose my wits, and I can maintain my dignified posture even in the face of overwhelming circumstances. Incredible. I'm Rabbi Yochanan. I will say top of Tzadik Gimel. All right. Right, 93a. So Gidon Tzadikim, this is beautiful Gemara. So Tzadikim are even greater than Malachim. Shnei Amar, Ana v'Amar Chazak Guvran Arba Sharian Mahalchim Begol Nura v'Chavalo Iti Behon v'Ravya Diri Vay Domel Baralakim. So the tzaddik is mentioned in the pasuk before the malach. Now, I will say the truth is that is not a chiddush. Of course, tzaddikim are greater than malachim. It's not even a shayla, right? Why? Because malachim don't have the ability to grow. Malachim don't have the ability to change. Malachim don't have the ability to transcend adversity and overcome adversity. So it is davar pashut that, of course, tzaddikim are greater than malachim. Incredible. Amrab Tanchum Bar Chaniloi. B'shash yatzechanayim Mishael v'Azariah mikiv shana eish. Bal kol umas ha'olam etafkul l'sarein shei Yisrael apneim. So this is incredible. When Chanayim, Mishael, and Azariah came out of the kivshan, when they came out of the furnace, so what happened? All of the nations of the world came along. And literally, again, they struck the enemies of Klal Yisrael, ultimately, again, on their face. On their face. In other words, they gave him a patch. The Gemara says, "Va'amar lahem yesh lachem eloka kazeh v'atem mishtachlim l'tzelem." So I'll say, so the truth is, this was a musar to Klal Yisrael. In other words, when Chanai, Mishael, and Azariah came out of the kivshan, the nations of the world said to the Jews, what is the matter with you guys? You have a God like this who saves people from a fiery furnace, and you're worshiping our gods? Incredible, right? I would say sometimes the greatest musar that we receive is the musar from the nations of the world. Miyad Paschal v'amru l'cha Hashem atzdaka v'landu boshes panim k'yom hazeh. Amar Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani, Amar Rabbi Yonasan, Ma'id chsiv, what's the meaning of the pasuk? Amarti, this is beautiful, we'll say, Amarti ele b'tamar, ochzeh b'sansanav. So I'll say, what's the meaning of the pasuk that says in Shir Hashirim? Literally, again, I said, I will go up on the palm tree, but I only take hold of branches. Only take hold of branches. What's the pshat? So the Gemara says, Amarti ela betamar eli Yisrael. So again, the tamar, the palm tree, represents Klal Yisrael. Kadosh Baruch Hu essentially says, my goal, my desire, is to hold on to the palm tree in totality, right? What I want more than anything is to be able to hold on to the palm tree. But unfortunately, I can't wrap my hands around the palm. Why? Because Klal Yisrael has rejected me. Instead, all I have are a couple of branches. Who are my branches? Who are my branches? Ultimately, again, Chananya, Mishal, and Azariah. So I'll say, by the way, I just want to tell you, Gemaras like this are very affirming, because sometimes in life, we find ourselves very disillusioned by relationships and feeling so let down that people who we count on don't come through, and all these different feelings. And it's important to understand, such as the nature of relationships, that's kind of the way it works. Kadosh Baruch Hu also had expectations. He had expectations ultimately, again, of holding on to the entire palm. But yet again, he didn't get the whole palm. Even if Kadosh Baruch Hu didn't get the whole palm, what does he get? He gets a couple of branches. He gets a couple of branches, beautiful branches, wonderful branches, but just branches. Just branches. Sometimes, again, not getting exactly what you want or what you had anticipated in relationships is par for the course. The Gemara goes weiter. So what's the meaning of this story, right? This is a nevuah, obviously. This is from Zechariah. I saw in my dream a man riding on a red horse. He was standing between the myrtles that were in the swamp. They were in the swamp. Now, the truth is, it then goes on, right? It then goes on to say that afterwards I saw other red horses and white horses. So, what does that mean? What does that mean? I saw it at night. Kadosh Baruch Hu was ready, was disenchanted with how mankind was behaving, and he was ready to go ahead and turn the entire world into night, to destroy the world. The man was riding on the horse. Who's the man? Hashem ish milchama, Hashem shemo. Asus Adam. What does it mean on a red horse? First white line. Hashem is ready to turn the entire world into blood. But as soon as he saw Chaim, Mishal, and Azariah, ultimately again he calmed down. He stood amongst the myrtle branches in the swamp. What's the myrtle branches? The myrtle branches, those are tzadikim. Shneimar vahi omeid es hadasa. Megillas Esther. Vein metzula ela Bavel. What's the swamp? The swamp is Bavel. Shneimar homer letzula cherbi v'narosecha ovish miyad meleim rogez nasim shrokim ba'adumim. So now, sorry, ba'adum nasa levanim. Amra papa shmamina susya chivra mal ilchalma. By the way, so the red horses represent destruction. The white horses represent salvation. So good to know, if you see white horses in your dreams, that is a good sign. I will say, just a tremendous Musar Haskell from here. The Rebbe Shalom was ready to go and destroy the world. Ready to destroy the world. So what changed his mind? What changed his mind was Chanai, Mishal, and Azariah. Three people changed HaKadosh Baruch Hu's mind about the entire world. I say sometimes we think to ourselves that what we do as individuals doesn't matter. Come on, I'm just one person. How much do I really matter? Let's say we matter more than we could ever imagine. If three men, Chanai, Mishal, and Azariah. By the way, I want to point out who, excuse me for saying this, they weren't even the greatest people of their generation, right? There was Daniel, there was Yecheskel, there were other people. But yet, again, they saved the world. I will say there is no telling what our actions could do for the world as a whole. Tremendous. Let's go right there. So, Rabbanan Lehecha, this is great. After Chanani, Mishal, and Azariah came out of the Kivshan, where did they go? Right? What do you do after that? So where I'm going to Disneyland. Where did, because we'll say now, what the Gemara is really asking is something fascinating. After that event, we never hear about them again. So where did they go? So the Gemara says, Amarav, ba'ayin hara mesu. They died. They died as a result of ayin hara. Now, we'll say, now, what does this mean? They were the subject of so much attention, and their piety became the subject of so much attention that level of attention is not healthy. They died as a result of ayin hara. So the Gemara says, Shmuel says, Berok tavu. They drowned in spit, in saliva. Now, what does that mean? So we'll say there is an incredible Maharsha over here. So the Maharsha says this doesn't make any sense. He says, listen to this. So we'll say, listen to this outside very quickly. Remember the Gemara just said before that after Chanai, Mishael, and Azariah came out. So the nations of the world literally verbally beat up on the Jewish people. And they said, what is the matter with you people? Why are you worshiping other gods when your God is so great? So the Maharsha says, what does it mean that Chanai, Mishael, and Azariah drowned in the saliva? It meant that, so to speak, that the Jews were subject to the verbal abuse, theological verbal abuse of the umos of the goyim. So like sometimes when people talk, so they spit a little bit. So the idea is that the Jews were being beaten up by the umos ha'olam, and they were being embarrassed. So what does it mean that Chanai, Mishael, and Azariah died in the spit, in the saliva? It means that even though Chanai, Mishael, and Azariah did something so beautiful and so spiritually heroic, what they did caused the embarrassment of Klal Yisrael. And because it caused the embarrassment, that's the saliva, right? Almost all of them spitting at Klal Yisrael, not spitting, but talking, giving them musar, that embarrassment caused them to die. So we'll say, see here what's happening over here? Chanai, Mishael, and Azariah, what did they do? All they did was a willingness to give their lives al Kiddush Hashem. But what they did ended up resulting in an embarrassment for Klal Yisrael. And when you embarrass Klal Yisrael, there's culpability, even if it's fundamentally and wholly, totally unintended. Now, both say, what do you see from here? How careful we have to be with each other's feelings. How careful we have to be with how we talk to each other, how we relate to one another, how even, again, unintended embarrassment and hurt of another Jew has such dramatic consequences, overwhelming. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yochanan says, no, all the Yisrael v'nos nashim v'alidu banu v'banos. I'll say such dramatically different narratives over here, right? So first two opinions say they died. Second opinion says, no, what are you talking about? They went to Eretz Yisrael, right? They retired to Eretz Yisrael and they had children. Bonus, Ketanai, the Gemara says, Machlokes Tanaim, Rabbi Elazar says, Ba'ayin haramesu, Rabbi Yeshua, Omer Barok, Tavu Chamra, Allah, Sabanas, Nashav, Ali, the Banu, Banu, Shnei Mar, Shibuna, Yoshua, Kohen Agadol, Ata, Vereacha, Yoshua, Lifnei Hashem, Ki Anshe Mofes Hema. So Moses, the Gemara talks about this Yoshua, Kohen Gadol, who lived at the time, again, of Chanai, Mishael, and Azariah. We'll talk about him in just a moment. And the Pasuk relates that Yoshua, Kohen Gadol, is sitting there with his friends who did miracles. Who are his friends who did miracles? So what do you see from here? That Chanai, Mishael, and Azariah, after the story with the Kivshan, moved to Eretz Yisrael, got married and had families. Okay, but Daniel Lehechana Azal. By the way, where was Daniel? Where was Daniel in all of this? Right? Daniel was the most trusted advisor of Nebuchadnezzar. He was the senior prophet of the time. Where was he when Chanai, Mishael, and Azariah were being thrown into the Kivshan Aish? Amarav lemichra nara rab b'Tiveria. So Nebuchadnezzar actually dispatched him to go and create a big river, right, a big body of water in Tiberia. Okay, he was on a like a civil engineering project. Shmuel says lasuye bizra das pasta. No, he was there to begin to work out an import contract, right, for aspasta. Aspasta is like a type of animal food, to bring in aspasta to Babel. He was there to bring chazirim, to bring pigs from Alexandria. So apparently, again, Alexandria, right, of Egypt had the best chazirim, had the best pigs, and he had to negotiate the contract to bring those animals into Babel. Is that true? Vatanya, v'tod l'sarofe, amar ein part of the chazir yotzim el-Alexandria shal Mitzrayim she'ein chot chinaim shala b'shol shal teled. No, I will say it's fascinating. Alexandria, they would only sell livestock after removing the uterus of the animal. Why? Because they did not want they did not want their animals to reproduce outside of Alexandria. They cornered the market. They cornered the market on a certain type of robust livestock. So in other words, they would sterilize the animal before they would go out and take the animal out of it. So how was Daniel able to import these animals? So again, a good Yiddish cup. So the Gemara says, what did he do? So the Gemara says, Zutri Aisi below Datayu. He brought very young ones, so no one had to have a meaning that he was mating them and trying to reproduce them. Okay, point is, he wasn't in Bavel when all of this occurred. Tanabanan, there were three people involved to ensure that Daniel was not present when the story of Chanai, Mishael, and Azariah happened. We'll see why in just a moment. Who were they? Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar. So we'll say, remember again, Daniel couldn't be there. Why? Because if Daniel was there, Daniel also would have been thrown into the fiery furnace. Why? Because he too would not have bowed. The issue is then when they would have been saved, people would have attributed the salvation to who? To the merit of Daniel and not to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And this was Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. This was their moment to shine. This was their moment to shine, and therefore again Daniel couldn't be there. Next, the Gemara says, Daniel also said, you know what, I got to get out of here, because he also apparently had a premonition that he too would have gotten thrown into the furnace, and did not want the downfall of Nebuchadnezzar's theological downfall to come through him. He also wanted it to come through Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So it's interestingly enough, Nebuchadnezzar also sent Daniel away. Why? Nebuchadnezzar had a sense that this was coming to a head. He was going to ask Daniel to bow. Daniel wasn't going to bow, and then he would have to throw Daniel into the Kivshan Aish. He didn't want to do that. Why? Because he looked at Daniel as a god. And he did not want to throw his own God into the furnace. Now, how do we know? The Gemara says, how do we know that Nebuchadnezzar looked at Daniel as a God? Fine, he bowed to Daniel. Okay, so we'll say, so now, this is all happening at the same time. At the same time as Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So we'll say, so obviously, again, so there were other people who also wanted to be of prophetic stature. So these two guys, Achav ben Kulya and Sidkiah ben Maasiyah. And they also posed as prophets, although they were Nevi'ei Sheker. Uksiv, v'lokeach mehem klal, l'chol galus Yehuda, asher bav le'mor, yisimcha Hashem k'tzidkeo ka'achav, asher kol cham melech baval b'ish asher safam. So, asher safam, lo ne'emar, asher safam lo ne'emar, elo asher kalam. So as we're going to see in just a moment, these two false prophets, Achav and Tzidkiah, were also thrown into the furnace. Now, interestingly enough, they were singed. They weren't totally burned, but they were singed in the furnace. So the Gemara says, what happened over here? They were made like roasted grain, not totally incinerated, but singed, burned. So the Gemara says, so what did they do? What did they do that was so bad that caused them to be thrown into the furnace? Listen to this. They went to the door of Nebuchadnezzar. Achav Amrullah, Kamar Hashem Hashmiel Tzidkiah. The Tzidkiah Amar, Kamar Hashem Hashmiel Achav. It's interesting. So these two guys posing as prophets go over to the daughter of Nebuchadnezzar. So Achav says, listen, right, daughter of Nebuchadnezzar, I'm a prophet of God. I come speaking the word of God. God has told me to instruct you that when Tzidkiah propositions you, you should give yourself to him. Give yourself to him. And Tzidkiah goes over to her. I come to you with the word of God. When Achav petitions you, right, you should give yourself over to him. Okay, so the Gemara says, so Azla va'amra la'avua. So I'll say, by the way, I just want to point out something amazing, which is interesting, that you see the regard in which they held the Jewish prophets, right? She doesn't say, like, get out of here. Right, rather again, she says, okay, she takes this to her father. So Amrullah, Elohim shel Ehu, Elu sonin zimuhu. So Nebuchadnezzar says, something doesn't sound right over here, because the God of this people, he hates immorality. So the notion that he would instruct you, right, to give yourself over to these men doesn't make that much sense. So what happens? So Nebuchadnezzar says, so do me a favor. Next time they come your way, send them to me. Send them to me. So sure enough, again, when they come back, so the daughter of Nebuchadnezzar sends them to Nebuchadnezzar. So man Amrulachon. So Nebuchadnezzar says to them, tell me, Tzidkiah Achav, who gave you this message? Amru HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God. But Nebuchadnezzar says, listen guys, I did a little fact checking. I asked Nebuchadnezzar, I asked Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah about your supposed prophecy, and they told me fake news. They told me totally fake news, right? Never happens. So what's going on over here? Amrulay, Anan Nami Nivi Kavasai. This is great. So Sidkiah and Achav say, well, 1 second. Why are Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah's words any more important than ours? They're prophets and we're prophets. Okay, we're all chaverim. So again, in other words, just because Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah say it's not true, doesn't mean it's not true. We're prophets also. So they want Ledido lo amar lahu, Ledido amar lan. God didn't speak to them, God spoke to us. Amar lahu, ana be'ina dab dekinhu, ki cheichi dab dekinu debad kesinhu, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So Nebuchadnezzar says, you know what, I have a good idea. The way I checked out Hanani, Mishael, and Azariah's prophetic credentials was just a little fiery furnace test. So if you guys don't mind, I'm going to subject you to the same test. If you come out okay, then great. Of course, then your word is gold. So Achav and Sidkiah say, hold up there. It's not fair. It's not fair. They were saved because there were three of them. Hanani, Mishael, and Azariah. There's only two of us, Achav and Sidkiah. So Nebuchadnezzar says, no problem. Phone a friend, right? Phone a friend, right? No worries. You know what? You get your guy. You can choose anyone you want, whoever you want for them for your furnace mezumin. Go ahead. You know, absolutely no problem. Choose whoever you want to come with you to the fiery furnace. So this is crazy. What I'll say. Amru. So they said, you know what? We choose Yoshua Kohen Gadol. Sabri Leisi Yoshua Dinafish Suchusayu Umagna Alon. So they said, okay, we're going to choose Yoshua Kohen Gadol. We'll say, now remember again, we just heard Yoshua Kohen Gadol was the Kohen Gadol at the time. Remember again, he was friends. He became friends with Hanani, Mishael, and Azariah. So Tzidkiah and Achav say, okay, we choose Yoshua Kohen Gadol. Let him come into the furnace with us. Fine. So the Gemara says, Achsinu shadinu inu iklu Yoshua Gadol ikrichu mane. So what happened? So they threw him into the furnace. Achav and Tzidkiah were burned, and Yoshua remained unscathed, except his clothing became singed. Okay, Shneimar vayiranios Yoshua Kohen Gadol omi lefnei malach Hashem uksiv v'yomer Hashem el Satan yigar Hashem b'cha v'amar yidaned Tzidkiah at elamai taima ahayin b'cha porta Nura. So again, so now Nebuchadnezzar seeks with Yoshua, and he says, Yoshua, obviously, I know. Sorry. Nebuchadnezzar says, I understand why Achav and Tzidkiah were burned, because obviously, again, they were false prophets. But my question is, my time ahanya b'cha porta Nura. Yoshua, you're obviously righteous. But why is it that your clothing got a little bit singed? In other words, in Nebuchadnezzar's mind, if you are righteous, then what? You should escape the flames in totality. So why is it that you totally survived in that, but your clothing was singed? So the Gemara says, Hanani, Mishael, and Azariah lo ahanya behu klal. Nebuchadnezzar says, you know, I just want to tell you, Hanani, Mishael, and Azariah, their clothing wasn't even singed. You know what I'll say? Can you imagine, like, it's like that moment, like, stop talking about Hanani, Mishael, and Azariah, right? I got it. They're great. They're tzaddikim. They're fine, right? So, you know, Nebuchadnezzar compares everyone to Hanani, Mishael, and, Hanani, Mishael, and Azariah, their clothing wasn't singed at all. So here, Yoshua Kohen Gadol, obviously you're a great guy. You survived the furnace, but your clothing was singed. What happened over here? So Yoshua says it's pretty simple. They had the combined merits of three people. I'm only one guy. Avram, so but Avram was only one. So Nebuchadnezzar knew his Torah, right? He says, but Avram Avinu was also thrown into a fiery furnace, and there was only one of him, and yet he emerged totally unscathed. So we'll say, so ultimately again, so to which Yoshua Kohen Gadol says, here's the difference, that ultimately Avram was thrown into the furnace by himself. Therefore, the fire had no rishus at all. I was thrown into the furnace with rishayim. The fire had rishus to have an impact on them. Once the fire was given some level of shlita, some level of control, it impacted me as well. That's what people say, the famous adage, that if you have two dry sticks and one wet one, the dry ones could ignite the wet one. In other words, even though normally a wet stick is impervious to fire, but put enough fire around it, and ultimately, again, the wet stick ignites as well. A person can be very righteous. I will say, so the wet stick is the tzaddik. So the wet stick can be very righteous, but surround the wet stick by enough rishayim, and unfortunately, again, the rishayim have an impact on the tzaddik as well. Incredible, the impact of our surroundings. So the Gemara says, by the way, my time yanish. What's the real reason? So the Gemara feels that that's not the real reason, right? If Yoshua Kohen Gadol was really a big tzaddik, then at the end of the day, the fire should not have impacted him at all. Why did the fire impact him? Incredible, because his sons behaved inappropriately. They were kind of obviously, and they married women who they were not really allowed to marry. And Yoshua, the father, said nothing. Failure to exercise paternal prerogative, failure to enter, exercise parental control, ultimately is profound failure. Yoshua was wearing soiled clothing. I'm going to Darish Bar Kafra, B'tzipori. What's the meaning of the pasuk? Sheish hasaorim ha'ele nasanli. So we'll say Megillas Rus. Megillas Rus. Rus goes to the field of Boaz, and literally again the pasuk says that Boaz gave her 6 barleys. 6 barleys. So where it says, "My sheish hasaorim." What does that mean? 6 barleys. If you literally he gave her 6 barley kernels. So the Gemara says, would Boaz just give a poor person 6 barley kernels? That doesn't make any sense. So it's like Tzadik Gimel Amud Beis 93b. Ella sheish sein. Rather, he gave her 6 sa'ah. Now that's a lot of barley. So is a woman going to be able to carry back 6 sa'ah of barley? It's a lot of barley. So we'll say, so in fact, interesting enough, the Gemara says, in fact, he gave her 6 barley kernels. Why? It was a remez, it was a metaphor, an allusion that she was going to have 6 sons who would each be benched with 6 brachas. So it wasn't meant to be a sustaining gift, but rather it was meant to be a symbolic gift. So the Gemara said, listen to this. Who are the 6 sons? Ve'elohim, this is incredible. Who are Rusa's 6 descendants? Who again, each of them blessed with 6 brachas. Ve'elohim, David, Mashiach, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Now I will say, by the way, this is Rusa's pedigree. Rusa's pedigree. And I will say, by the way, you know what you trace it all to? That pivotal moment when Naomi was going back to Canaan, right? And Naomi said, don't come with me. And Arpa goes back to Moab, and Rus goes to Canaan. Sometimes in life, we stand at a crossroads, and the decision we make at that crossroads impacts not just us, but impacts us for generations. Sometimes we're aware we're at a crossroads. Sometimes we're unaware that we're at a crossroads. But this is the importance of living life with incredible mindfulness, so that when you stand at a crossroads, you know that you're in the moment of a pivotal decision and you choose wisely. Incredible. So we'll say, let's go through the list. Here we go. David, Tichsev, Vayan Echad Mehanarim, Vayomer Hine Ra'isi ben Yishai Beis Halachmi. I saw this, right, this son of Yishai, Yodea Nagin, V'Gibor Chayil, V'ish Milchama, V'Navon, right, V'Navon Davar, V'Ishtar. So what's about Shem Imo? So 6 brachas. So again, we'll define what each of these are in just a moment. These are the 6 attributes, 6 brachas of David HaMelech. V'Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Rav Kala Pasek Hazeh, Lo Amru Doeg Ela B'Lashon Hara. So we'll say, now this was said from Doeg, who was one of the advisors. This is one of the advisors of Shaul to Shaul. Now we'll say, now Doeg meant it. You know, sometimes we'll say when somebody compliments someone, it's really disparaging. So this was a compliment that was meant to be disparaging. It meant to really, not even disparaging, but meant to create animosity. Here we go. Yodea Nagi, always mean that David HaMelech knows how to play music. Sheodea Lishol, he knows how to ask good questions in Torah. Gibar, Sheodea Lahashi, he knows how to answer questions in Torah. Ish Milchama, Sheodea Lisav Litem Milchamta Shal Torah, he knows how to do the give and take in the battle of Torah. Ish Tawar, Shemara Panim Ba'alacha, he's a beautiful appearance, that he knows how to assert himself in halacha. The Navon, Davar, and he's a Navon, and that he understands how to extrapolate knowledge from one area to apply to another. Vashem Ima, God is with him. Ultimately, whenever David says a halacha, the halacha always follows him. In all of these areas, Shaul said, this is beautiful, but my son Yonasan has these same attributes. Milsa de bididei nami lo havabe chalash daitave kanyebe. But ultimately, again, when Doeg said Vashem imo, that Hashem is with him, meaning that the halacha always follows David. That David always has like an impeccable sense of truth. Shaul didn't have that, and neither did Yonasan. That's when Shaul became jealous, and that, of course, sets off this entire dynamic where Shaul sees David as a threat and literally tries to kill him. The B'Shaul ksiv b'chalasha yifne yarshia. By Shaul, it says wherever he would set his eyes on, he would decimate. He's talking about his enemies. Wherever David would turn, ultimately, again, it would be successful. So again, both are the shonos of success. But David HaMelech has an elevated form of success over Shaul. Incredible. Minon the Doeg. How do you know that it was Doeg who said these things? So the says, Ksiv ha'kavayan echamyan ha'arim miyuchat shemen ha'arim. Ksiv ha'sam v'shem ishmi abdei Shaul b'yomahu netzat v'nei Hashem u'shmo Doeg ha'adomi abir ha'ra'om ha'asher l'Shaul. Good. So Mashiach. Next. So therefore, I will say, the point over here is, Rus's descendant, remember, Boaz gives Rus six kernels of barley to highlight. You're going to have 6 descendants who are each benched themselves with 6 brachos. Now we just saw David HaMelech, one of those descendants, and the 6 brachos of David. Mashiach, Tichsiv. So it says incredible. What's the bracha of Mashiach? So beautiful. Incredible. Ruach Hashem. Right? Ultimately, again, the Ruach Hashem will literally rest upon him. Ruach Chachma, Ruach Uvina, Ruach Eitza Ugivura, Ruach Das Viras Hashem. So these are the brachas of Mashiach. These are the brachas of Mashiach. I will say these are the qualities of Mashiach. Uksiv, Vericho Biras Hashem. Ultimately, again, I'll be inspired in Yiras Hashem. Alexandri, Melami Shetino Mitzvos V'Yisurin Kerechayim. This also teaches us ultimately, again, that Mashiach, I will say, is someone who's going to be loaded with mitzvos and yisurim and suffering. Then we will say, in other words, what do you mean what? What is the primary quality of Mashiach? The primary quality of Mashiach is the ability to maintain spiritual fidelity despite overwhelmingly difficult life circumstances. This goes back to what we saw yesterday about ultimately, again, if you don't learn Torah at night, your house is consumed by fire. At the end of the day, right, the most important aspect we have in our Yiddishkeit is the ability to maintain fidelity and allegiance to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, even in times of overwhelming adversity. That's the quality of Mashiach. Mashiach is someone who is loaded with mitzvahs, loaded with spirituality, but also loaded with incredible suffering. Rava says, Demorach Vadoin. Mashiach is very interesting. All right, we'll say, you know what, we're going to stop over here for today. All right. We'll say, I just want to point out, right? Good, I got it. We didn't finish the daf. We didn't finish all the way. But we'll say, but now at least, we look normal. We look normal. I feel last time you look a little abnormal. Now, we'll say we're much more in the range. Shkayach, everyone, tremendous. All right, Chavra Zuma, have a great day, everyone. Yeah.
It's a pretty well-known story about Rosh Hashanah. He used to sleep in his clothes. He's afraid in 1938.